updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out. Brand loot boxes as surprise mechanics. They desperately try to make the case that loot boxes are basically like Kinder eggs, that it's all quite fun and quite ethical. Yeah, it didn't take long before EA got called out on their BS. Now, since then, the UK Parliament has met up once again to discuss the aftermath of that embarrassing hearing, as well as ways to move forward. Recently, there was some back and forth between the committee and a member of Parliament going by the name Margaret James, the UK Minister for Digital and the Creative Industries. Much of this discussion was transcribed by news outlet gamesindustry.biz, so I'll be using their article as the basis of this video. So, with that out of the way, let's break it down, shall we? One of the committee members asked Margaret for her thoughts on loot boxes and their potential link to gambling, as well as steps that countries like Belgium and Netherlands have taken to regulate them. Now, this committee member actually went as far as saying, or as EA rather bizarrely called them, surprise mechanics, basically expressing incredulity with EA's laughable attempt to pretend loot boxes aren't what they actually are. In response, Margaret James pointed out that Belgium and Netherlands laws are different, noting how they have taken offline gambling laws to online games and how the UK's gambling laws don't quite work that way. She then proceeded to contest the notion that loot boxes are gambling because in the UK, gambling is defined as true games of chance where money is at stake. She claimed that loot boxes cannot be cashed out and that they only reward digital items like cosmetics and gameplay enhancements rather than financial rewards. Yeah, I wholeheartedly disagree with this part of her argument. For one, plenty of games do allow you to cash out, like PUBG and CSGO, among many others. FIFA also allows players to cash out, even if through unsanctioned means. Third-party gambling websites where you can earn real money are being created using loot boxes featured in these games as a foundation. And even for games that cannot be cashed out, sure, they don't offer financial reward, but James is vastly underestimating how much value people can place in video game worlds, especially in online games where there is some kind of social hierarchy. In these games, people want to look badass, they want to be the strongest, there is genuine emotional and psychological attachment, to the point where these online worlds might become more important than money and basic necessities. Money for a lot of these people can become a means to further their in-game goals when these in-game goals become more of a priority than sustaining their livelihood. Her argument is that legally in the UK, gambling is defined by games of chance that offer financial reward. But by definition, gambling is also a risky action one takes in the hopes of a desired reward. And among certain crowds of susceptible people, in-game items are highly desired. As long as that's the case, monetary reward or not, loot boxes are gambling, or certainly come close enough to it that it is worth scrutinizing in a similar manner. From a psychological standpoint, loot boxes very much work exactly like slot machines. Loot boxes take visual and audio cues from slot machines for a reason, and most importantly, both loot boxes and slot machines involve users being manipulated into spending money because their addiction will often take over reason or financial responsibility. Now, when asked whether James was unconcerned about loot boxes, she did respond with, quote, "I didn't say that." She then elaborated that she believes if tangible evidence emerges, especially where youth is involved, she'd take this issue very seriously, but doesn't believe that there is enough research done yet, and that regulation should only be pursued once more definitive evidence is presented and provided. She said that at best, there is currently some studies claiming correlation between loot boxes and more traditional gambling, but not direct causation, which I can agree with, though I would say that loot boxes are its own form or brand of gambling, that it still warrants scrutiny, that it's too unchecked right now, given how much trouble they can cause, given how exploitable they are. Maybe it's not gambling in the way UK defines it, but it is a troublesome and psychologically manipulative in-game mechanic that encourages compulsive spending nonetheless, with the primary purpose being to extract as much money from users as possible without limits. Now, James did emphasize that she's not being complacent to loot boxes when the committee asked her if she was just waiting around for something to happen before taking action. They are looking into these types of mechanics alongside the UK's Gambling Commission, but she believes we need a better understanding and more study on the topic before just shooting for regulations. She said she believes in the importance of searching for evidence to not just look at symptoms, but also underlying problems we may be missing. The topic then shifted to gaming addiction and the World Health Organization's classification of gaming disorder. On that front, James claimed that specialists she's spoken to have claimed only 1% of gamers have problems with spending too much time playing. Now, this right here is a bad way to frame it, as it is believed that there are about 2 billion gamers in the world right now, and 1% of that is still a whopping 20 million people. Companies may say the same thing about people addicted to loot boxes, that only a small percentage of gamers uncontrollably spend money on them, but a small percentage of a huge population is still a lot of people who might need help. James did add that she isn't denying that there are people with problems, that evidence is being actively searched for because there is very little research that's been done when it comes to gaming habits. She did agree, however, that game companies should take the World Health Organization's classification seriously and introduce solutions like, say, adding in-game alerts when people have been playing for too long, which some companies have actually done. Nintendo in particular, a few of their titles do warn players about excessive playtime. Then, after a committee member suggested adding time limits to games, James said she believes the World Health Organization's classification of gaming disorder also comes from little research, and that what people consider addictive gaming behavior might depend on numerous factors and circumstances. For example, in cultures that emphasize academic success, where ironically studying in itself becomes its own compulsive behavior and addiction, gaming for more than a few hours might be seen as addictive. In other countries where academic success isn't as huge of an emphasis, gaming for a few hours might be seen as pretty normal behavior. James also relayed how there are reports from families who see gaming as a relief, with some families actually glad to see children playing some video games rather than studying all the time. She also noted that a lot of the research currently done on gaming addiction comes from Southeast Asia, which is not a big enough sample size for the entire world. From there, on this topic, James finally concluded by saying that there's just not enough research on these matters yet, and that more research should be pursued. This is why, according to her, the UK's National Health Service has been given $2 billion in funding just for this purpose specifically. The hope is that this will allow the organization to research links between mental health and gaming and its monetization practices. The conversation then shifted back to loot boxes and the notion that they're very much akin to gambling. The argument was brought up by the committee that even if rewards earned from loot boxes aren't monetary in nature, they can still evoke that sense of gambling for young minds, a point that I 100% agree with. James retorted that she takes issue with that stance because games aren't purely a game of chance, as there is some skill involved in winning or achieving certain goals. In retort to that, I will argue that oftentimes games will be designed to make the experience of people who don't pay up much more insufferable, leaving them no choice but to partake in a paid game of chance. Plenty of games technically allow you to earn everything via gameplay, but it would take so much grind and so many hours to do so due to artificially imposed roadblocks and obstacles that it's much easier to simply pay some money. That's how these games are designed. And with loot boxes specifically, odds are tweaked in such a way that a significant amount of money has to be shelled out before a player has a good chance of obtaining a desired rare item. Yes, video games aren't purely a game of chance like slot machines are, but the game of chance within the game is often made to be an integral part of the overall game design. Games will often be designed to nudge players towards these monetization schemes, randomized or not, by making gameplay without them unbearable and untenable. Elder Scrolls Blades is a perfect example. Those timers on chests that keep piling up, yeah, that was intentionally implemented to hamper progression so that players have to buy gems to unlock these chests instantly, or so players have to just outright buy loot boxes from the store. These companies understand that people instinctually have a need for instant gratification. And there is no skill involved here when it comes to waiting for timers to die down. You either wait or you pay up so that you can remove that artificial timer. Same thing for a game like Dungeon Keeper, where you have to wait a long time for progression to be made, or you could just buy the in-game currency that will completely mitigate that. That's how these games are designed. That's how egregious they are. The committee also brought up FIFA Ultimate and how loot boxes there affect your in-game performance rather than being just cosmetics. James did concede on that front that there is a distinction and that certain types of loot boxes can definitely be more dangerous when it comes to their potential correlation with gambling. Now, I still don't think James understands how much value certain gamers place on cosmetics. Unlike slot machines, video games are unique in that there is an in-game avatar who represents the player, so how that in-game persona comes across, how it looks, is a huge part of the gameplay experience, especially in online games. It's a part of the game's enjoyment and the sense of empowerment. Just saying, if these cosmetics were truly so worthless, we wouldn't be seeing cosmetic items in games like Counter-Strike Go being listed at such high prices in the Steam marketplace. It's not that I don't agree that pay-to-win is worse than cosmetic microtransactions. I'm just saying that cosmetics shouldn't be dismissed as irrelevant either. This whole notion of they're just cosmetics is complete bullshit. James then moved on to talk about how her biggest concern is young people spending excessively. How she accepts